You were hired to house sit for a nervous dog and a busy man. That's it. Simple job, easy money. But what you find on the third night will make you bolt out of that house and never trust another guest room again. Tonight, hidden cameras, footsteps in the hall, and a door that won't stop pounding. I was 22 and broke enough that anything paying cash looked like a small mercy. After college, I did odd jobs around town babysitting, mowing lawns, answering Craigslist gigs, whatever would keep food on the table. That was how I met Craig. A woman ID dog sat for gave his number to a neighbor friend and said, "He's trustworthy and he pays well." I like that sort of referral. It felt like a shortcut past awkward interviews and stranger skepticism. When I arrived at his house, it sat at the far edge of town, a comfortable house with a long gravel drive and woods pressing close on two sides. Inside it smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Craig was in his late 40s, tall, a plain windbreaker and wire frames, the sort of man who smiles as if he rehearsed the exact number of teeth he would show. He showed me the spare key, where the dog bowl lived, and wrote the Wi-Fi network on a sticky note. He gave instructions in a polite, measured tone. Feed Max twice a day, take him for 2 walks, don't let him out in the back alone, and if anything came up, call him. He left the guest bedroom light on in case I arrived after dark, and told me the pay would be a little extra for staying overnight. "Easy," he said. "Max likes company." The first 2 nights were the kind of boring small-town evenings that make you realize you were getting older. TV until midnight late, walk around the property with a leash in my hand, and the dog trotting happily beside me, then sleep with Max, curled up at the foot of the guest bed. The house creaked in all the familiar places old houses do that, but nothing felt wrong. I was comfortable enough to phone a friend and complain about my job hunt and then fall asleep. But on the third night, something small and wrong dug its teeth into me. I was sitting cross-legged on the bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, the lamplight throwing a warm pool across the dresser opposite. The dresser had an alarm clock on it, just a black plastic rectangle with a bright blue LED display that screamed 11:02. It looked newer than everything else in the guest room, almost conspicuously modern against the faded lamp and floral curtains. I reached for my phone to check the time again when a tiny black pinhole in the clock's face caught the light. It was an almost invisible dot above the numbers, a perfectly round, black eye looking back at me from a surface that should have nothing to watch. My stomach did something tight and sharp. I picked the clock up. It was heavier than it looked. When I tilted it toward my face, I heard a faint, mechanical whisper from somewhere inside, something tiny spinning or cooling. A hum like a fan that shouldn't have been there. Max, who'd been asleep by the door, lifted his head and started whining. The marrow of the house shifted. From somewhere deep inside, not the front door, not the road, but farther in, I heard a sound like a door closing with deliberation. Every hair on my arm stood up. Craig wasn't supposed to be home for days. My hand froze on the clock. Everything narrowed to the sound of my breath and the beating of my heart in my ears. Footsteps padded down the hallway outside, soft at first and then heavier, like someone walking with purpose. I set the alarm clock back on the dresser and moved toward the bedroom door with as little sound as I could manage. My throat felt raw. My hand found the knob and I locked the door. "Hey," a voice called, too casual considering the pounding that began within seconds. "Open up. I left something in there. Come on, this'll take 2 minutes." Craig's voice, too close, too calm. My brain ran through explanations like a bad TV show. Maybe he'd come back early. Maybe he forgot his wallet. The steps outside turned into knocks, then into hard pounding. "Open the door." His voice rose, suddenly hot and urgent. "I'm not joking. Open up. Panic doesn't arrive as one thing. It's a collection, the bat you. Do you consider grabbing from the corner of the closet that you regret not having the ridiculous? urge to call someone, the sharp private calculation that you could squeeze through the window if you were fast enough. I glanced at the glass. It was low and small and locked. Trying it would break something noisy. The knocking grew angrier, a sound that turned the house into an animal. Something changed in the cadence of the voice, calm and reasonable to brittle and accusing. "Open the door or I'll call the police and say you broke into my house," he shouted. A strangled animal sound from Max made the threat feel more dangerous, less likely to be hollow bluster. I wasn't sure which would have been worse, him barging in or the police arriving and seeing me in someone else's home. The lawyer would say, "Keep calm." The woman who recommended the job would say, "Trust Craig." My gut screamed, "Get the hell away." I moved before I thought it through. I shoved the window latch open with fumbling fingers. Max made a grab at the sill but pulled back. I climbed down into the yard, grass wet and sharp beneath my palms, and ran away from the house so hard my shoes left skid marks in the gravel. Behind me, the voice rose to a shout, then a curse. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the road and ducked behind a row of mailbox posts. By the time my mother pulled into the dark turnaround 15 minutes later, bless her for being awake at 2 a.m., I was shaking so badly I could barely focus. I told her in bursts about the clock and the pinhole and Craig's footsteps and his threats. We called the police. They told us exactly what I'd been told on 911. Don't return, don't try to get evidence, don't confront. I slept the rest of the night on my mother's couch with the TV on low and Max's emptiness in my ears. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The lawyer was polite and precise. Without a recording or the device itself, there's nothing to show the camera existed. Craig can say it was a motion sensor. He can say anything. Without proof, you're left with your word against his. He advised not to go back alone. He advised documentation. He advised a lawyer's patience I didn't possess. I wanted the clock. I wanted to take a photo of that little black hole, to have pixels on my side in court or in a police file. But returning was out of the question. The idea of seeing him, his practiced smile replaced by the man who pounds his own door, turned my stomach into acid. The woman who'd recommended me went radio silent. Her messages never loaded again. Weeks slid by and the story settled into bones. I never got paid for the nights I'd stayed. No text from Craig apologizing showed up. The police made a report but took no charges. They photographed nothing but the empty bed and my shaking hands. The worst part was how the house kept following me, not physically but as an afterimage. I started checking every clock and smoke detector in the places I stayed. I pulled at alarm faces, peered into vents, ran fingers along the seams of lamps and picture frames. The world looked like a surveillance checklist. I kept thinking about the way it had felt to peer into that pinhole, the sense of being looked into by an object that had no right to be looking. For weeks, I had nightmares where I sat up in the middle of a stranger's bed and realized a tiny black eye watched me from the alarm clock, from the smoke detector, from the toothpaste cap. I'd wake and count the dark corners until dawn. People told me I was lucky to get out, maybe, but luck didn't. T explained the buzzing inside the clock, or the measured way D waited for me to stay the week, or the fact that his voice could turn from gentleman to threat like a channel switch. Whoever installs cameras like that knows what they're doing. They know placement and angle, how to look through seams and catch a sleeping face without waking it. They pick houses at the edge of town because fewer neighbors notice. They plan the timing when the owners are gone, when a single person is alone because human bodies make predictable rhythms. Months later, I found my reflexes had changed. Hotel rooms felt invasive. And Airbnb's off-limits now sounded like a red flag rather than a house rule. My phone's camera app became the first thing I opened in a strange room. A simple bedside table could hold a secret. A tiny circle, no bigger than a freckle, could be an eye that outranked every lock the law could offer. I never filed a case worth pursuing. I didn't. She had the proof, and I was too tired of being told to wait for evidence while other people told me to just accept it and move on. I learned to pick jobs differently, to decline the attractive cash offer that required me to sleep on someone else's schedule. I developed a ritual. Before spending the night anywhere new, I run my phone camera across clocks and smoke detectors up into smoke-choked corners under lamps. I watch the screen like it's a second pair of eyes, and I take pictures of anything that looks modern in an old room. I send them to someone, anyone, and I mark the timestamp. Sometimes I still dream. I hear footsteps in a quiet hallway, and I reflexively bolt for the window. And sometimes I still imagine that quiet, almost mechanical whisper from inside a plastic rectangle. The memory is small and precise, the way the pinhole in the clock caught lamplight like a pupil. And the truth is simple and stubborn. People who put tiny cameras in guest rooms do it on purpose. They watch. They plan. They wait for someone to fall asleep and lower their guard. If you ever house sit for a stranger or stay alone in a supposedly safe place, check everything. Look into clocks. With smoke detectors and lamps. Open dresser drawers and peer under their faces. It's not paranoia. It's practical. You'll feel foolish if you find nothing. You'll feel blessed if you do. I never saw Craig again. I never pressed charges. I got a different job, moved on, and tried to forget. But if you ask me whether I do recommend staying the night for cash in someone else's house, I'll tell you the same thing I tell anyone who will listen. Take the money if it is worth the risk, but sleep with the understanding that every object in that room might be watching you, and every hum might be the sound of an eye staying open long after you think you've reclosed yours. The second story takes place last September, when a couple named Emma and Ryan booked an Airbnb for a long weekend getaway. The listing described a cozy 2-story house with a wraparound porch, warm lighting, and good reviews. It looked picture perfect in the photos, just what they wanted for a quiet trip to visit Emma's sister in a small town 3 hours from home. The host, a man named Alan, mentioned one small detail in the description. A basement storage room was locked and strictly off limits. They barely thought about it when they booked. When they arrived just before sunset, the house looked a little more weathered than the photos suggested. It stood alone at the end of a narrow road with only one neighbor in sight and dense trees surrounding the property. Alan was already waiting on the porch before they even got out of the car. He looked to be in his late 50s, tall but slightly hunched, his gray hair combed neatly across his head. His smile seemed polite but strangely forced, the kind that never quite reaches the eyes. Alan greeted them, shaking hands a little too long before showing them around. Inside, the air carried a faint scent of dust mixed with something sweet, almost like candle wax. The living room had an old couch facing a vintage television. The kitchen was dated but tidy. Upstairs, a single bedroom held a large bed beneath a ceiling fan and a small dresser with a mirror. Finally, Alan stopped at the basement door near the kitchen. He tapped the heavy padlock and, with a more commanding tone, told them the room was private and should remain locked at all times. He didn't smile when he said it. Then he wished them a pleasant stay and left. That first night passed quietly, though the surrounding woods and complete lack of traffic created an almost unnerving silence. Sometime after midnight, Ryan thought he heard a faint thud from beneath the floor. It never repeated, and he convinced himself it was just the house settling. The next day was normal. They explored the town, met Emma's sister, and returned late. But around 2 a.m, Ryan awoke to a strange dragging sound from the basement, like something heavy sliding across concrete. It came in short bursts, scrape, pause, scrape again. He froze on the stairs, listening. Emma heard it too. Neither of them moved until it finally stopped. The second night was worse. Near 2:30 a.m., The sounds returned: footsteps this time, 4 or 5 slow steps, a pause, then 3 more. Between the pauses, Emma whispered that she thought she heard faint breathing. Terrified of making a noise, they lay awake, staring at the ceiling until dawn. By the 3rd morning, the atmosphere inside the house felt heavier, almost charged. While Emma made coffee, Ryan checked the basement door. The lock remained in place, but when he leaned close, he smelled something damp and sour, like stale air mixed with decay. That night, the noises began earlier. First a soft metallic clink, then more footsteps, stretching on and off for nearly an hour. Emma barely spoke before bed. The 4th night brought the discovery that ended their stay. While getting ready for bed, Emma looked up at the smoke detector above the bed and asked if it seemed odd. At first, Ryan didn't see anything, but when he stood on the mattress for a closer look, he noticed a small round black dot in the center that gleamed under the light. A chill spread through him. Using a chair, he twisted the detector off the ceiling. Inside was a tiny camera with its indicator light glowing faintly. Panic set in. He checked the walls and found another lens hidden behind a small hole near the dresser mirror, both aimed directly at the bed. Heart pounding, they stuffed their belongings into their bags and left the house without a word, driving to the nearest gas station to call the police. 2 officers returned with them to investigate. The front door, which they were certain they'd locked, now stood ajar. The officers entered first and quickly confirmed the cameras, collecting them as evidence. Then they turned their attention to the basement. To Emma and Ryan's shock, the padlocked door was wide open. The officers descended the stairs and within moments shouted for backup. Alan was found crouching inside a dark closet in the basement. Beside him sat a monitor wired to the hidden cameras, showing live feeds of the bedroom. He was arrested on the spot and charged with criminal trespass and invasion of privacy. Emma and Ryan never had to face him in court. The police handled the case, but the experience left a scar. They haven't stayed in an Airbnb since. Even now, they double-check every smoke detector and picture frame whenever they travel, haunted by the thought of unseen eyes watching them while they sleep. The 3rd story comes from a college student named Mark, who took a summer job working night security at a mid-sized office building downtown. It wasn't glamorous, just hourly rounds, checking doors and logging visitor badges, but it paid well and left him time to study. The building was mostly empty after 8 p.m., its long hallways glowing with pale fluorescent light and humming quietly in the air-conditioned stillness. During his first few weeks, the shifts were uneventful. Mark walked the same routine each night, scanning keycards at checkpoints and watching the security feeds from a wall of monitors. Most of the cameras showed nothing but darkened offices, elevator doors, and vacant conference rooms. But one camera feed, number 7, always made him uneasy. It covered a narrow maintenance corridor behind the basement storage rooms, a place employees rarely entered. The corridor's single flickering bulb created a perpetual strobe, making shadows stretch and shrink as if something moved just out of sight. One night around 2 m, while sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone, Mark noticed a small red icon blinking on feed 7, motion detected. He leaned closer. The screen showed the usual empty hall until the flickering light steadied for a split second, revealing what looked like the outline of a person standing perfectly still at the far end. Before Mark could react, the light flickered again and the figure was gone. He replayed the clip 3 times. Each time, the image showed only a single frame with a human-shaped shadow, no face, no details, just a faint silhouette. Convinced it was a glitch, he logged it and moved on. 2 nights later, the motion alert triggered again. This time, the figure appeared closer halfway down the hall, still motionless, but unmistakably human. Mark's stomach tightened. He radioed the building's on-call supervisor, but no one responded. Against his better judgment, he decided to investigate. The corridor was colder than the rest of the building, the air damp and metallic. His flashlight beam wavered across peeling paint and stacked boxes. Halfway down, he paused. Something about the wall looked wrong. A section of the drywall near the ceiling had been cut out and patched back, the edges rough and mismatched. He reached the end of the hall, empty, no sign of the figure. Yet when he returned to the security room and replayed the feed, the monitor showed a chilling scene, Mark himself walking down the corridor, followed several feet behind by a tall, dark shape that hadn't been there in real life. Heart racing, he rewound the footage. Again and again, the shape followed him, always keeping the same distance, but never appearing in person. Mark called the police, who arrived 20 minutes later and swept the building. They found no intruder, no signs of forced entry, and nothing unusual in the corridor. But when one officer inspected the patched drywall, he noticed something faintly gleaming through a crack. They pried the section open to reveal a small hidden cavity filled with electronic equipment, a miniature DVR, wires leading to a pinhole camera, and a portable hard drive humming quietly. Someone had been recording that hallway and possibly the entire building for weeks. The police later discovered similar hidden cameras behind ceiling tiles in restrooms, stairwells, and even inside a locked supply closet that only staff should access. The equipment was traced to a former maintenance contractor who had been fired months earlier. He was arrested at his home, where officers found hundreds of hours of surveillance footage stored on encrypted drives. Mark quit the job a week later and switched to a different campus security position. Even now, he says fluorescent lights and flickering bulbs make his skin crawl, reminding him of the silent figure that seemed to watch him from the other side of the camera lens. 3 different nights, 3 different places, a quiet suburban home, a late-night gas station, and a corporate office basement, yet each story shares the same rotten core. Cameras that were meant to keep people safe became the very tools of terror. In the first story, a family thought their baby monitor was harmless, only to discover someone was silently watching their child. In the second, a lone cashier realized the store's security system wasn't just protecting inventory, but broadcasting her every move to a stranger. And in the third, a college student found that the building he was hired to protect had already been invaded, not by a visible intruder, but by eyes hidden behind walls and ceilings. Technology promises safety, but every lens is a doorway. We install cameras to feel secure, forgetting that the same feed we trust can be hijacked or misused. The scariest part I send to the people who hide the cameras, it is that most victims never even know they were being watched. The next time you catch your own reflection in a dark camera dome, or see a tiny LED light glowing in the corner of a room, ask yourself, who else is looking back?